Welcome everyone to a new webinar series called the 8 Steps to Self-Discovery, where we'll be discovering new ways, new forms of health and well-being. In our first episode of the series, we'll be talking about taking the first step, the foundations to health and well-being. And I'm going to be flipping the tables on Feisal today. Instead of him leading the conversations, I'll be interviewing him, asking questions, but of course it'll be a conversation. And we'll both be interacting and learning together. So welcome, Feisal.
Thank you. Thank you. Guess everybody's coming in. So
Yeah.
Good. Fionn, we're reversing roles today, so that should be fun.
Yeah, let's see how it goes. We'll allow it to merge as it does. I was wondering today if, because we'll be digging a bit into your story. And I know you've told that story hundreds, maybe thousands of times. And I was wondering if we could maybe do it a little bit differently today, inviting you to really step into a place of presence, as if you're telling the stories for a first time. So to let go of the language and the stories that you have around it, and to really feel into in the moment what's coming up for you and how you could express that. So I was thinking as a way to start, maybe you could share a bit about how you invite yourself into presence, and to share then with the audience, to invite them to come along with you. So maybe to just spend 1 or 2 minutes to bring us all into presence.
Okay. Then if it's okay with everyone, maybe put our hands open up as if we're in prayer, but on our laps, depending how you feel comfortable. I close my eyes and then just do some deep in and outer breath as you want. You can do 2/3 in and more on the out breath as you prefer, and just keep in silence for a few minutes and just bring ourselves back to just calmness, stillness, nothingness. It's all going to be okay. As you feel comfortable, let's come back into where we are together and start to share a place of peace, love, care, kindness, gentleness. Open your eyes whenever you're ready.
So I'd love to start, if you're willing to share, maybe a bit further back than you usually share, so not just pre-cancer days, but like back to the little boy that Feisal was, and maybe share a few of the significant events that shaped you as a person before you even started your business, and then lead us into kind of how you started your businesses when you're in your 20s and how that led up to the point where we'll dig deeper.
Okay, so as many know, I was born in the Congo, I was raised in Belgium, and I kept my mother very busy in the hospital. I had a 3rd-degree burn when I was 3.5. I ate 17 iron pills and almost didn't make it. 6 months after that, I can go through my body and go through ankle, knee, back, scan myself and tell you all the adventures that I guess created a lot of stress for my mom. So I was born with asthma. They did everything from gave me cortisone shots to I ended up in Switzerland during the summers because I couldn't go to Pakistan because I would have asthma attacks. I spent time in Davos, which is interesting. That's where I did one of my first talks. Actually just not very far away from the clinic I used to go, and I did a talk on well-being. So what a cosmic joke, right? And my uncle who was on the call was there as well. And so if I go back to one of the memories that kind of started to drive the story that drove my life was when I was 3.5, I had the 3rd-degree burn, and I was in the hospital for 4 weeks, and my father wasn't there.
That like? What was that like as a 3-year-old to be in that hospital?
Well, I had a girl next to me who burned herself, I don't know about head to toe, but that's what I remember, making spaghetti. So I had, my brother and I were playing with a lighter, and my pajama caught on fire, and our cook or helper or whatever, au pair, saved my life by using our hands and, turning the fire off. And, all I remember in that was me riding my little tricycle, plastic, whatever it was, down the hall of this burn unit in this hospital in Belgium. And I've been taken back by one of the experts that we might talk about later to that time. And, my father didn't show up for a number of weeks. And this has been debated now recently by my uncles telling me that it's not an accurate story, but that he didn't show up, and I didn't know, but his brother was very sick, and that's why he didn't show up. And so as a 3.5-year-old, you don't know the whole story. So obviously at that time, you lock into your head that your father doesn't love you and that you need to prove your worth. And once that story locks in, the rest is history, right? And then I just crushed it in school and did very well and graduated top in class, went to Ivy League University, graduated top 3% in there, and just kept going. So that's
did that narrative or that story or that meaning you made at the age of 3, did that change at all as you grew up, or was it kind of just locked in and kind of stayed the same?
Well, I didn't know, right? I didn't know. I wasn't aware until post-cancer, when I was taken back to that event and told that that was the meaning I gave and the story that I was living. And then later I wrote a chapter in the book, which is, Am I Good Enough? Right? And that's the story that many people in 2nd, 3rd gen family businesses tell themselves. Many people in general tell themselves. And as a result, we started our first company in Eastern Europe, my cousin, my brother, and I. And then we went into war-torn Africa, and we just kept building and building and building. And, it's everybody from the external thought we were just achievers and trying to, just make lots of money. But there was a lot going on because there was this element of disheartenment that nobody was aware of that was driving it. But when you run businesses, you don't show that side, right? You're supposed to just crush it.
I'm curious about that now as you share this. Like you just mentioned your uncles in the room, and for you to be able to share these intimate stories, like the relationship between a son and a father, that's a very intimate thing. And to be, part of family business, which is all interconnected. What's it like for you to share these things? What's the experience of that like for you to share this with the world?
No, I'll be very honest. I spoke in Davos and my uncle's gonna chuckle, but obviously nobody can see him, so it's okay. But it was funny. I went up there and there was maybe 120, 125, you know, leaders in their field and philanthropists and everything. And I went up there and shared the story of cancer and shared the story of divorce. And as I walked down, they were in absolute disbelief, right? And they were just thinking, why would you do that? And it was amazing. The older generation was just like, couldn't understand, while the next generation was like, wow, finally a breath of fresh air, that somebody's showing weakness amongst all of this space that we're in. So, you know, it's comfortable yet uncomfortable, right? I never used the word divorce until I got on that stage.
Wow.
I hardly ever used the word cancer, right? That's why I'm very particular when you look at how we share. I don't use the words fight. I don't use the word battle. I don't use any of those words. You need to have a little respect with, these are not little things that we're dealing with.
And now you as a father, with kids who are growing up and becoming men, what do you think it will be like as they begin to share their story out? What do you think that experience will be like for you?
Well, I don't know. They still think I'm, you know, at times unreasonable. They still think I'm at times a hard ass, right? I think there's times where they still think I'm unapproachable, right? Even though I can be as loving, as kind, as generous, as physical, which I am all the time, you know, they're still, you know, and they're both different, right? I have two sons and they're both different and they both see and hear what I say and give different meanings, right? And I did, like, they didn't know what school I went to until the website went up 8 years ago. They had no idea I'd gone to UPenn Wharton. I didn't want to bring that pressure. They didn't know even that I had cancer until the website went up, because they were 1 in 3. They had no idea. And imagine nobody ever said anything, which is quite shocking, right? So that means they were 10 and 12 when they found out. So that's 9 years later. And then they, you know, we did our part to, I don't know whether it was a good thing or not a good thing, to kind of cushion them from that reality. And even the book, I was asked to write the book many, many years ago. And I kept kicking the can because in my head, I didn't want to add more pressure, right? Even though I said to them, Baba's living his life, you need to create your life, you know? And, you know, I just happen to be your Baba. That's about it, right? It's nothing more, nothing less. So how much they hear, how much they believe, I don't know. You'll have to ask them, which I know you're speaking to them anyway. So you can ask and not answer to me. Because you don't tell me anyway, so it's okay.
Yeah. I'm curious about the tipping point, right? It's like, okay, so this thing happened to you in year 3. You worked in school, academically, then in business, grew these. Like, what was it that really kind of pushed you over the edge, that got you to the point where it's like, wow, I've done so much now that my body's given me cancer? Like, what was that tipping point?
Well, I was walking out of the doctor's office, and as we were at the door, and he says, whatever God you believe in, please pray. And I was like, did he just say to pray? And the answer was yes. And I came out, we paid the bill, I went home, I called my brother, I called my cousin, I called my other cousin who's on the call, on the webinar right now. And I said, well, she didn't have to move, but everybody else, stop moving. Tomorrow's going to be a tough day. And the next day I walked in and he said, I'm very sorry, but you have stage 3 cancer. And that was it. The world changed. at least my world changed.
Mhm.
So,
And how did your kind of closest immediate family react to that?
well, everybody was in shock. I remember I called Papa and I said, you need to get on a flight tonight. You need to come home, and I'm going into hospital tomorrow. My lung has collapsed and I need you to come home. And he said, it's okay, I'll come tomorrow. I said, no, Papa, you need to get on the flight tonight. The flight is booked. And Mummy had just gone to Karachi to take care of her mother. And when I called her, she knew that I would not book a flight at 3:30 a.m. if it wasn't very bad news and a transit. And she said, you're lying to me. Tell me what really happened. And I said, my lung has collapsed. Now, obviously, I told her what had happened. I didn't tell her the cause of the lung collapse. Yeah, I told her partially. And then I called my cousin and I said, you stay put, because I thought we'd go to the United States. So I called Mahmoud and said, stay put. And he was actually visiting his sister. And then I called my brother Faris and I said, it's time to come home. So when I woke up from my procedure of getting a biopsy, they were all in the room except Mahmoud, who obviously was waiting for further instructions.
What did that feel like to have them all in the room there with you?
Well, Faris knew, my parents didn't. So it was a bit of a, how are we going to have this conversation? But I don't know about whether it was good or not, but the oncologist just started talking, assuming they knew. So I don't know. I've never had the conversation how that landed, but that's exactly what happened. So they heard it from the oncologist, not from me, as far as I know.
And then what were the next steps after that? What happened right after that event?
Well, I mean, in terms of personally, I mean, we had 5 opinions. I know I wasn't in the space I'm in, but when you operate in war-torn Africa and countries like that, you're pretty organized, right? So we got 5 opinions within 48 hours. And in the meantime, I handed over the company in the hospital room, which was less than 5 minutes. I just said, I don't run the company day to day. The 1 year's done, the 5 years done. I travel 6 months of the year, just pretend I'm on extended leave. And, anything you say is at the risk of being fired. And then I called my lawyer in Switzerland, asked him if the house was in order. And he said yes. And then he spoke to Uzma and I told her, look, don't worry, everything's in order. I know the drill. If something happens, you're all good. But anyways, he's not going anywhere. And then the real conversation was with the doc. I said, Doc, what happened? He said, what do you mean? I said, Doc, I'm 35. I get a checkup every year. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I'm too chicken shit to try drugs. I don't even drink coffee or tea. Like, how in the world is this possible? And he said, I don't know. So I said, find out from someone who does know. And his classmate founded the cure. And he didn't know either. And that's when I said, this is nonsense, right? When you've built all these companies in all these funny countries and been trained to deal with whatever, and you're told that at 35 you might drop with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, you're like, okay, something's not adding up here. I think we need to.
Tell me about that, having a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old as a father with that potential of not making it through. What was that like?
Well, every time I had a PET CT, I would visualize saying goodbye. And I was able to say it to my parents, to my cousin's sister, my brother, and Uzma, but the body would not allow And I did it every time. And I did it and I still do it. And only 2 years ago was I able to say goodbye to the two boys, just visually. And yeah, so that was my practice, but couldn't do it. The body just refused to go there. So.
And so when your body refused, how did you decide to move forward from that?
Well, when the docs gave me the option of 1 round every 3 weeks, and they gave me the odds, I said, guys, I need to be able to say goodbye and die in peace. So you need to do whatever you can. And they came back, and Dr. Lowe came back, and he said, the guru has answered. I said, okay, what did the guru say? He said, the guru said, we're going to give you 5 rounds in a row, 4 times, for a total of 20 rounds. And I said, okay,
For those that are not aware of cancer treatments, like what's the norm and how is that in comparison to what kind of chemo treatments most people do?
Well, most people have around every week or 2 weeks. I mean, every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. There's not many I don't know any other protocol that asks you to do 5 rounds in a row. So I would go in on a Monday, have chemo Monday to Friday, and then go home Saturday. And it's 3 hours of chemo, 45 minutes of prep. And then that impact is there for a whole week. So went home, had a choking sensation. So you're scared to sleep. So you need sleeping pills to go to bed. And you can't taste food for a week. So you have to imagine the taste of food to maintain your weight. And in that 5 days that you were in hospital, you lost 5 kilos. So you maintain the weight the first week. And then the second week you eat and you gain the 5 kilos to go back and do it again and again and again. And every time you go, you get weaker and weaker and weaker. And then, of course, at the end, everything collapses and I ended up in isolation because the whites were wiped, everything was wiped.
Hearing stories from people who've gone even through, the regular rounds of chemo, the pain, the suffering, how did you find the strength to keep going back?
Well, I remember the first time I came back, I got on my knees and put my head on Uzma's lap and started to wail like a child and said, promise me not to take me back. And she just stayed in silence because she knew if she said yes, it was game over. And what kept me going is the 4 little eyes at home that I spent 2 weeks with every time I went home. That's what helped me go back every time. I remember taking Mehdi for my haircut. I came back after my 5 rounds and told Mehdi, come on, Baba's getting a cool haircut. So I took him to the barber and they did number 1 or I don't know, whatever number it is. And I came back and, the ones from our background will know it's coche, right? It's like basically you got nothing left. When you want to save money, you get coche so that, you have to wait a long time for the next haircut. So yeah, came back with almost no hair on my head. And then I didn't have hair for 9 months anywhere in my body because everything went from my eyebrows to everything.
What was it like coming out of that, like nearing the end of that whole treatment cycle, coming out at the end? What was that like?
No, I mean, you finished and then the doctor says 50-50 and you're like, you got to be kidding me, right? That you went all through that, 20 rounds of chemo, at that time 2 surgeries. I hadn't had the 3rd and they say 50-50 and you're just like, where do I punch you? And then I asked him, I said, now what? He goes, simple. If something happens, you'll do what you got to do. I'll do what I got to do. your family would do what they got to do. And then he started going like this, because to see my brother with, with the rosary in his hand. And he said, the big boss will do what he has to do or she has to do. And that was it. But obviously I came back and I started to sell everything because I was scared.
Scared?
Yeah, I didn't want to be on the other side of the 50.
And so by selling, what were you doing?
I was creating less pressure on myself. So I was scared to work hard. I started hiring lots of people. I started delegating like I've never delegated in my life, even though I had a massive team. It was even more. Of course, I destroyed some companies in the process because I hired, my whole life we've hired good people and taught them, not extremely, well-trained people and not knowing where their heart is. So, yeah, I messed up a bit when I came back, but, eventually cleaned up and stuck to hiring good people and teaching them the skills.
What was that like for you to change the way in which you worked?
No, I mean, it was, look, first the fear had to be overcome, right? So I had to just cool down. The amazing thing was I wasn't traveling. I was home, which was incredible, right? I had never spent so much time at home in my life. I never spent so much time in one place in my life. So that was incredible. But yeah,
What
there
was
was
incredible about that?
that, I was home for every meal. I was there to experience everything that the kids were going through, right? When the teachers came and asked what's going on in the house because Maddie was, very insecure, we explained and we were there, right? So all of those things, with the travels, I mean, I would have missed, right? I wouldn't have even known unless I was told what happened. So.
And then what did you do post that? If your chances were 50-50, what did you do to deal with those odds?
No, it was just interesting, right? I started to be, other family members started to get sick, and I started to support them in terms of getting second opinions, getting access to medical care, getting support in terms of the best treatments. And then I started spending time myself in clinics, in hospitals, to the point of burying, some who passed away. And even though it was really tough to watch and really challenging to see all the different things, because initially it was cancer, then it became heart disease and orthopedic issues. And so normally you'd think that you'd feel, of course it hurt, it was painful because some were loved ones. But strangely enough, it also felt really good, as in fulfilling. And I was like, this is bizarre. Like, how can I be experiencing and watching some of the most challenging things that one has to deal with, but at the same time actually find it fulfilling? So it was a really, I was in a very strange place, but knew something was brewing.
And going back to the point at which, the founder of the cure that you mentioned, the doctor who should have had the answer but didn't. Did you ever find the answers as to the source of where it all came from?
Well, that's what happened. As soon as I finished my first round, I went to see, she's one of our core team members. I went to see Anissa, and it was unbelievable. I walk in and she looks at me and she's like, how are you doing? I said, I'm finished. She's like, how were you before? I said, great. So she goes, so how do you feel physically? I said, oh, I'm on my knees. And she's like, perfect. Prostate and beg for your life. I said, excuse me? She goes, yeah, prostate and beg for your life. I said, am I paying you for this? She goes, yes. You're an arrogant human being and you never ask God for anything. And that was the beginning of moving towards understanding beyond what the doc in Indianapolis could not answer. And interestingly, imagine that was my first experience. And I ended up spending the next 10 months asking to be alive between namaz and namaz, because I took a nap in between each one. And at the end, I prayed to be alive to pray the next one, and the next one, and the next one for 10 months. And she nailed it in the first 5 minutes of walking in that door. And she's the one that started the whole adventure of trying to understand how could I have contributed to what I experienced or created.
Tell me about some of the other discoveries that you made about yourself on that adventure.
I mean, you know, I started to do yoga with individuals. I started to mind train, right? I started to spend time with Ayurvedic masters. And I mean, I started to realize that I wasn't really there. I wasn't physically present. I was physically, but I was checked out. My brain was somewhere else, right? And then later I asked, and Uzma said, yeah, we'd be sitting in a restaurant and she'd ask me a question. And it's just the two of us, and I would answer, huh? And then she would ask again, and I would do the same thing, and then she'd just give up. Now that's pretty messed up, right? So, you know, you're there, but you're not there, right? And that's why now, you know, when we started to create the process, one of them, the key components is presence and engagement, right? Then the other component was sleep, right? When I was traveling, it was brutal. 6-7 hour time difference. I worked 15 hours a day, right? Then eating, right? The timings when I was home was like clockwork, Swiss style. But when I was traveling, oh boy, it was a mess, right? So all of these pieces, right? Then you look at support. Who do you talk to? I had no one. And how much can you tell your wife? There's a limit, right? I mean, I was dealing with heads of state. We were bringing in anti-HIV drugs into countries where, you know, they didn't want to even admit the prevalence rate of 424 to 26%. Forget accept that we need the drugs. They only want to accept that they have a problem. So yeah, so it was all the different pieces that, you know, from what I ate to when I ate to how I slept to when I slept and how much I slept, and the support system and the ability to express and the ability to lean on someone. And I didn't have any of it. Right now, what we've all created, I mean, wow. I wish somebody had created it for me or given it to me, right, at that time. But I guess, you know, everything happens in perfection. At times, sometimes you wonder what that means, right?
Mm. And what did that, how did that checked outness lead to the next challenging event, which was the divorce, and how that occurred?
No, I mean, I think that piece of the puzzle, I mean, is a reality where, you know, she had lost her mother when she was 20, who was not given permission to get divorced, right? And so she was asked to be in truth and realize life is short, right? And and as a result, chose to be in truth and say, I love this man, but I'm not in love with this man. And took a decision. So I don't know whether it was about me being checked out or not checked out and all of that, but I'm sure it contributed, right? I mean, I can't say that it didn't. So yeah, that was a different experience. That was me being completely not able to cope It means accept for 3 years. So
when do you mean?
when I got divorced, I was not able to accept it for 3 years. The cancer, I accepted very, very quickly. So it was a very different meaning I gave and a very different response from my side. Because I couldn't see the gift. I couldn't see the opportunity. I couldn't see the perfection of life. I couldn't surrender to the will of God. I questioned. I begged. I was angry. Right.
And so what made that shift happen 3 years later?
I don't think that the reality happened. It's called divorce. It's called numbness when you feel nothing between your legs. Excuse me, whoever's older and in the room. But yeah, it's you just gotta accept at the end of the day, it is what it is, and move on from there. So yeah, it was the reality of what finally happened, and that was the beginning of starting over. And then, of course, you started to realize that it was a gift because it wasn't working. But it took a while.
And so how have you applied the learnings from your own journey to what it is that you help other families with?
Oh, so I mean, the first thing that I spent a lot of time, even before we started Qineticare, was to really understand the trigger, right? Which is the source of disease, because the doctors couldn't explain, right? And I sat with people who had heart attacks, triple bypasses, that were cheated by their friends, right? People who had all kinds of things happen to them that made no sense. There was no symptoms. There was no historical. There was no genetics, right? And so initially was looking for the trigger, but then really realizing very quickly that the physical, right, the mental, emotional, and the relational were completely interrelated, right? And like I said, the meaning, right? The meaning you give, right? So as I started to experience myself, all these pieces, and started to work with all these pieces and the interconnectedness, I started to realize that a single dimension approach, which is what was happening in silos, is not working, right? You fix A, then a little while later you've got B, and then a little while later you got C, right? And it was just not, and what we've created, it exists, but it exists in silos, right? There was just no integrative space of, understanding the correlation between them. And also taking absolute personal responsibility for what was happening. That was another big piece, right? That I am responsible for the acidity and the toxicity and the ecosystem in my body, right? My body's cancer cells went AWOL, not yours. And I am not a genetic carrier. I've done my DNA testing because, as you know, I'm tested up the wazoo, right? Every week I have a test, if not 2, right? And I'm clean for 25 categories of cancer. Forget 25 cancers. Nothing. So nope, can't blame my mom or my dad or my grandmother or my grandfather on any side, or my uncles and my aunties. Right? It's all me. Right? So
how do you go about discovering the source, discovering your triggers? How do you find that?
I mean, look, if you want to go really basic, right? So I was having dinner Sunday with a dear friend who's done a bunch of webinars with us, and he mentioned something that happened. And I said, let's just go very basic, right? Of course, there's some experts on there that will say, oh, Feisal, you're making it so simple. Well, I don't know. I think simple is what we need to do, right? And it's look at the diagnosis or look at the disease, and just go back 12 to 24 months as a starting point and scan what has happened. Relationships, parents, financial, right? Anything that's going on. And not have to be big. It could be the littlest thing. And just scan and journal and just, go through. And 99% of the time, it comes out of their mouth in less than 5 minutes. Because they can't imagine that an event, right, from brothers splitting to a divorce, to somebody passing away, to a financial situation. I mean, I can give you my own example, right? 1998, we lost everything. At the end of the year, I had a slip disc, right? I can give you many examples. Ruptured disc. Why? When? It was my proceeding for divorce. I didn't even know. I'm in the shower, boom, my back goes. Kidney stones, another event, right? I'm sitting in the middle of Angola. Kidney stones. Why in Angola? But it happened because of an event, right? So again, kidney stone is acidity in your body, and then the bone releases calcium to neutralize, and then the calcium turns into stone, and then it gets stuck, and you have a little bit of pain. I still don't believe it's the equivalent of childbirth, even though I went through it myself, so I have the right to say it, and I went through it twice. I'm pretty sure that childbirth is a lot more painful. But anyway, I'm not a woman, so.
For those of the people listening who don't have anything, that's immediately like some acute issue, that's not like a very severe illness or disease, what's the point of doing this kind of self-discovery?
Well, look, each of us, I mean, if you want to go to the basics, right? So, many people don't know, but we have, it's an 8-step process, right? That we look at. And the first is very basic, right? It's just making sure that, we're medically okay, right? And there you're looking at family medical history, medical records, all the basics. I don't want to go into it because we're going to do webinars in each one. But that's kind of just making sure that, the house is in order from a medical perspective. Not to underplay, it's very important because it's foundational. But then you start looking at the drivers of the behavior, right? Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Do I really understand why I'm doing it? And a lot of it is subconscious. And it's, and then you start looking at gut health, brain health, sleep. I mean, I myself had a review, and I was given some, like liquid to drink, whatever, for 3 months by Dr. Golay, right? And I can tell you, before I started in mid-Feb, if I had a very stressful situation, my body would respond, my gut would respond. And since I've had the process, nothing. And trust me, I've had a lot of adventure in the last 3.5 months. It's not like I've been, surfing or something, but nothing. And I called Golay the other day and I said, Golay, he's like, oh, Feisal, now you know what it feels like to be normal. That was his response. Right? And then you look at, then you move towards thoughts and emotions, right? Do we really have anybody that helps us really assess what is really going on here? Right? Reflection point. Because like I said, with my gut, I thought it was normal. Not that stress, but at least, other things. And he's like, no, you've accepted it. So even with thoughts and emotions, right? We're told, oh, you have 80,000 thoughts and 80% are the same thoughts that you had yesterday. Yeah, but wait a minute. Is that how we want to live life? Right? Is that how we want to move through? Then after that, you're looking at beliefs and patterns. The example I gave you of myself at 3.5, giving a meaning of what my father did that drove me almost to my grave. The story I gave, from the meaning that I gave, which has been challenged by my uncle who's no more, who said, no, that's not correct. Your mother hasn't told you the right story, which was quite interesting to hear because he was pissed. Right? Then you look at relationship, right? The story driving your life. Right? Did we ever think about a relationship with self? I mean, nobody ever taught me that. Ever. Right? Self-care and self-love, like what? That was like Japanese. No insult to the Japanese, okay? And then you talk about alignment, right? Alignment between my values, my talents, and my aspirations, right? One of the core pieces was disheartenment. That's what drove a lot of the businesses we built. This disheartenment of the inequality of humanity is what drove the businesses. But we couldn't express it. We couldn't say it. We knew that was the vision. We knew that was why we were doing it, but we couldn't say it because nobody would understand. I mean, my father would have balked at me. He'd have been like, what? What are you kidding me? Are you a businessman or did you fall off the bed? Right? And then the epigenetics and genomics. So it's a really a way to look at your whole self, you know, in a multidimensional perspective and reflections, right? Blind spots.
Most people can see the direct benefit of doing all those physical checkups, right? Like, yeah, of course, it makes sense to check my brain is healthy. It makes sense to check if I have any genetic sort of diseases or anything like that. But to go into the thoughts or emotions or relationships, like, is that really necessary?
I mean, to me, this is a very simple thing, right? Are some of the behaviors or some of the thoughts or some of the beliefs and patterns that you have, would you like your children to have them? Let's go where it hurts or where it counts, right? Especially with mama bear, right? Mama bears don't listen until you tell them, would you like to give this to your children? Then mama bear wakes up and says, don't you dare talk like that. And you're like, well, if you don't break the pattern, this may show up, right? So it's you know, being open to understanding the impact that our thoughts and emotions have, being open to understand how we show up and the energetics we show up with, how that impacts our spouse, our children, even other family members or other people, right?
So there seems to be this acknowledgement on the physical side that, you know, I go to a doctor, he's going to give me some information, you know, I'm going to follow his advice and I'm going to get better, right? It's more difficult to see on the mental emotional side or the relational side how what someone else might tell me would even work.
Well, you've experienced the people we have on the team. They're not normal people. Okay. So if we're not counting about not normal people, right, then yes, I think it would be slightly challenging, right? But I think that, you know, sitting with someone who's objective and doesn't have any skin in the game other than real intent to love and care for you and mean well and be there to serve, to be of service, brings in perspectives of blind spots that we can't see, right? Why do we have an external auditor that comes in to check our businesses? I know that there's been a lot of audit issues, but, you know, why do we have consultants that come in to advise, right? Why do we have all these systems and processes in place, whether we're running our homes or running our companies? But why don't we have the same thing in our lives? To run the most complex system, which is the human body. right? And how is it only that the physical matters and not the rest? Knowing that the gut sends more messages to the brain than the brain does to the gut. Knowing that the heart sends more messages to the brain than the brain does to the heart. Right?
One of the things that often comes up when we get into this kind of a space is, do I have to? Can't I just keep going forwards? Can't I just keep, doing what I'm doing? And just like, if something bad happens, I'll take care of it. But for now, like, let's not look back. Let's not poke the holes. Let's not sort of let the worms out of the can. Can I just do that?
You can, but then get ready, right? So people used to ask me what happened. I said, yeah, some people get a push, they wake up and smell the coffee. Others get a kick and they wake up and smell the coffee. And then there's a third bunch like me who have their legs broken, and then they're asked either wake up and smell the coffee or it's time to go. So the question is, that would work on the condition that you're really paying attention to the push and the kick, because your body will speak, life will speak, your family will speak, but are you really listening? Was I listening? Clearly not. There were a lot of indications, but I was not listening.
How do you develop that capacity for listening to these kinds of things?
Well, one of them would be, in terms of just processing emotion, right? Through the meditation. The one we did was very, very basic, right? But presence, right? Learning to be present and engaged, right? Creating that space within, right? In order to create space for others, right? And that I did not learn by myself. I had help, just like we get help in many areas of our lives. So I think this is the thing, right? That we're willing to go to the lawyer, to the banker, and all of them, right? And we have all this team around. What about in terms of our own personal life, right? For our relationships and all the other areas, what team do we have in place to support us, right? You don't need a driver's license. To get a driver's license, you need to take lessons, then you need to take a test, and then you get a driver's license. What do you need to get married? Do you need to do a test and take lessons and all of that? And what about when you have children? Do you need to do that as well? Nothing. Right? How prepared are we? All of a sudden we're married. All of a sudden we're parents. Right? And as kids in school, what are we being taught? Achieve, achieve, achieve. Okay, now things have changed. Right?
With that, deciding to take that step to really look at yourself, I can imagine that there's people on the fence, right? Where they're like, okay, I can see this is a good idea, right? Like, it makes sense. Obviously, I want to be the best parent I can be. I want to be a good spouse or partner, whatever that might be. But I don't know if I want to go all the way to like everything that you're talking about. That sounds like a lot. How would you respond to people in that space?
Well, start by choosing something that resonates or that you feel like you might want to begin, whether it's journaling or meditation or getting your physical body in shape, right? Or choosing, like when it comes to food, right? What is driving that food behavior? If you don't want to go into the driver, okay, let's shift the choice. Like, begin with something, and then the domino effect will come. But start with one thing. And as you see the feedback loop from that, you will then may consider to do more things. But I think very importantly is to ask for help, right? Find someone that has good intentions, capability, and you can relate to, right? And spend time.
How do you figure out how to ask for help? Right? Like this is an area, if this is an area that nobody's really asked for help in this space before, how do they go about entering into that conversation?
Well, this is, Gino, your friend of yours and mine, wants to create a vetting process for this space. And he's right. There's two parts, right? One is how do you ask for help? And the other is how do you ask for help to the people that are actually well-intended. We won't go on that side because that's a whole conversation on its own. But, it's just like any other area, right? I mean, how do you ask for help when you're running a business? Right? How do you ask for help when you want to learn, I don't know, how to throw a ball or play tennis? You go to an expert, right? So I don't see how it's different when it comes to asking. It's just more uncomfortable because this is a topic maybe that you don't want to address or to open up to, right? But at the end of the day, the process of asking is the same. It's just a different topic. Right? This is what amazes me, that people think it's different. How is it different?
But if people are feeling that uncomfortableness,
yes, of course,
and they're on the edge, right? They're on the edge of kind of like, look, I can see clearly this is a good idea. I'm going to ask for help, but they kind of find themselves kicking the ball down the road. Like, yeah, I'll do it, but I'll do it like next year, or I'll do it next month, or I'll do it tomorrow. How do you get yourself in that space where you're proactive and you actually make that decision if there's no external thing forcing you to?
Like I said, I think you have to try something. You have to put yourself out there and try something. And I think the main important thing is to ask yourself, how do I feel? Right? So when we did the meditation in the beginning, for those who haven't meditated, how did it feel? Did it feel good? Did it feel different in a good way? Maybe I'll try more of that, right? Journaling, how did it feel? Now, some don't have immediate effects. So of course we have to be patient, right? But the thing is to get out there and try. Right? I can't be inside somebody's body and create that, right? Because you said not to go to an expert, not to go to an outsider. So as a self person is to try. And the main thing is, if I continue to do what I'm doing today for the next 20, 30, 40 years, am I happy with what I see? In all realms, physically, relationally, right? Mentally, emotionally. Do I feel I'm in a direction, in a momentum that I want to be in? And if not, then I need to change, right? Even you go to a feng shui master and he tells you today, this is what I see. And I'll tell you my own, right? Last year, for the first time I had somebody come in and he said, in 2042, something's going to happen. And it was bad. And I listened and I said, that's interesting, right? But that's until the moment of all the decisions I made until that moment. I saw him again this year. 42 incident wasn't that bad anymore. Now there's an incident in 2050 that looks really scary, right? And I chuckled because I know this minute I leave, I can choose differently and take that 2050 to 60 to 70 to 80 and keep going because I can choose differently, right? So the thing is that how do I take, and so when you're going back to your question of why would I do this, is that it's like reading a book that I get to choose differently with information I have so that I can show up differently. So I can love more intensely. I can be more present. I can have more energy. I can be more non-reactive and receptive and loving and kind, right? Positive. All of it, right? That's what's coming from this whole exercise. And have resilience when the curveballs happen. because they're going to happen anyway, right? Whether you like it or not. Somebody's going to say something, somebody's going to do something, something's going to happen, right? It's not in your, all you can control is the meaning you give to what happens and your response. The rest is not in your control. So how do you create that gap between event and response? Because if there is none, it's a reaction. If there is, it's a response, right? And that's one element of this whole process, one advantage. If you're saying, why would I do it? Right? That's just one piece.
So for people who are watching, we're nearing the end of time here. What would be a final thought that you would leave them with, that they can leave here today and go and use and in a practical way?
I do so many crazy things. So look, the basics, you know, as always, right? I start my day, I'll just tell you some of the practices, right? I start my day with meditation. I end my day with meditation. How you begin your day determines your day. How you end your day determines your sleep. Very simple, right? To process emotion, I journal every day. What that means, whether you do 12 minutes like Sadeghi taught and burn it, whether you just journal for 10 minutes in flow like Ronald spoke to, and then read it and see what's coming up so you can understand what is in there. Whatever form you like, it's your choice. Do some kind of movement, right? I play tennis, I swim, I trek, I do all kinds of things, right? And then do something to grow, whether it's read, right? I just started, I mean, some of my family will be shocked, but I started to drum 6 weeks ago, right? Yes, drumming. Can you imagine at 52, right? It's a comedy show, but I did, right? Completely shifting the right side of my brain, right? I learned how to swim. I finally learned how to swim 2 weeks ago, right? I can actually swim now, right? Which is quite hilarious, right? Again, at 52, right? So some form of growth, right? And then, you know, asking for help externally, that is your choice. I can't, you know, I'm doing it all the time, right? Tomorrow, I'm sitting with a Taoist master in Shanghai, and he's going to tell me whatever my body's saying, right? And he's going to talk about energy. He's going to talk about flow. He's going to talk about all of it. So, you know, to me, all of them are like reading a book. So either read a book or have an experience, but keep growing, right? Because, you know, it just makes life yummier.
Thank you so much, Feisal, for sharing everything that you've shared today, for bringing your presence into the space, for being vulnerable, particularly when there's people in the room who are family and opening up in that way. Thank you so much for sharing that with me and with all of us. And I want to thank the audience for being here, for witnessing that, and for staying with us through it. And I also want to invite you back to come back next week, where we'll be with our head of private health, Trish, who will be sharing with us how we can create the kind of medical infrastructure that will support us and our family. So welcome to come back, and looking forward to having you next time. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.